Christians. My friend here says that the term Christian was a derogatory term given to the disciples at Antioch. None of the disciples ever identified as Christians, nor instructed us to identify as Christians. This is a perfect example of somebody who hasn't spent any time in the Word of God at all, and all they have done has heard lip service from other people who pretend to know the Word of God and don't, and then they go back and they recite it over and over again. In 3 times in the scriptures, 3 times the word Christian is used. And in all 3 times, there is absolutely no indication whatsoever that even if the word Christian was used to be derogatory, it was used in a sense that the disciples accepted. It was only a derogatory term to non-Christians speaking to non-Christians. It was derogatory in that sense. Let me say that again. The term Christian was only considered to be derogatory from those who were not Christians, who were speaking about Christians to other non-Christians. For example, when you look in Acts chapter 11, verse 26, in support of the fact that Christians were called Christians and not in a derogatory sense, the verse this person is talking about is in Acts 11, verse 26, where it says this: And when he had found him, he brought him into Antioch, and it came to pass that a whole year they assembled themselves with the church and taught much people, and the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. There is no indication whatsoever here that Christian was used in a derogatory sense, or that the disciples had any problem with being referred to as Christians. Christ is Christ. Christ is the Messiah. Christ is the one whom we follow, and we are his disciples, and therefore we are Christians, meaning disciples of Christ. It's hard for me to understand how any Christian would ever see that as being derogatory, but it is derogatory. It could be from the sense of someone who is not a Christian who wants to say, look, you're just a Christian following that guy. Yeah, we follow that guy, so we're proud of it. We believe. But now we go to Acts chapter 26, verse 28. And Paul is making his case before Agrippa in his tribunal. And Paul starts explaining how he was saved. And he is trying to use persuasive words, as he did and does in his word. And Agrippa says to him, when Paul is making his case, Agrippa said to Paul in verse 28, almost you persuade me to be a Christian. So even Agrippa doesn't see it as derogatory, but he sees it derogatory in the sense that he sees himself above it, but he knows that Paul doesn't see himself. He knows that Paul does not see being referred to as a Christian as being derogatory. Agrippa is telling Paul, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. In other words, you are making such a good case that if it were possible, I might become a Christian too, like you. But I'm not doing that because I believe that being a Christian is not a good thing because, we are secularists. We are capitalists. We are Romans. Now we go to 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 16. Peter says, if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on his behalf. Show me where the derogatory nature of being called a Christian exists in this verse. Peter says that men will suffer as a Christian, as Peter ends up doing, as Paul did, as all the disciples did. They suffered as Christians. And Peter said, let him not be ashamed who suffers as such. If you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but glorify God on his behalf. So when I see nonsense like this, I don't understand how people come to these ridiculous conclusions when the word of God is plain, which is why I say it is ridiculous. We should glory in the fact that we are Christians. It is not a derogatory title, except to those who are not Christians when they speak to those who are Christians. But it is never a derogatory term on the part, or is never considered a derogatory term on the part of a Christian. Never has it been that way. When you say something, make sure you know what you're talking about, or be quiet and be provoked and be persuaded.